My name is Khalid, and most of you know me. I'm one of the directors at Safescope. Uh, and what we try to cover today, and there's a lot to cover in those 2 hours, really. 2 hours seems a lot of time, really, for a CPD. But in fact, there is a lot to cover. And again, as I said before as well, and if anyone has joined us now, that we'll take a comfort break in the middle as well, once we get to the right point. Now, what we try to cover today is the introduction to Building Safety Act very quickly. Introduction to new roles and duty holders under the Building Safety Act. That's the important part. What are the main requirements for those new roles? Application of new roles. And we have created a flow diagram to explain how these roles work, same as we did with the CDM regulations. New roles and duty holders, what are the different duties on the duty holders? What is expected from a new role of a principal designer under Building Safety Act? Competency criteria and standards, transitional arrangements that have been put in place, and a small quiz really at the end. And if time permits, we'll have a Q&A session at the end as well. Okay, I'm moving on to the next slide now. Safescope introduction. And again, if anyone is not seeing the change, please shout away, stay away, so I can get that sorted. Safescope, most of you know, and established in 2008, we specialize in CDM and construction safety. And just to add into the mix is that we have jumped into the Building Safety Act as well, and we are offering the new services of the client advisor, principal designer, and principal contractor advisor that are expected from Building Safety Act. Now let's jump straight into it. What is the Building Safety Act and why we are here today? Now, as most of us know, really, the Building Safety Act came out as a direct result of a tragedy. In fact, you know, we all know that what happened in 2017 with Grenfell Tower and the fire, which unfortunately killed 72 people. 72 people lost their lives, really. Happened in June 2017 in a 24-story block. The block was originally constructed in 74, and major renovations happened in 2015, 2016. The fire started at around 1 p.m. and burned for 60 odd hours, etc. And it's the deadliest structural fire in UK since the Piper Alpha oil platform of 88, etc. Now, what happened afterwards is something had to happen. So many people lost their lives, etc. And as again, most of us know, there was an independent review commissioned of the building regulations and fire safety requirements, because it was established early on that fire spread rapidly by the highly combustible aluminum composite cladding and external insulation that was used. And hence the review was conducted. What went wrong further to establish the background cause to it and whatnot, really. And the review was commissioned by Dame Judith Hackett. Her findings came out entitled Building a Safer Future, which is available, and it came out in 2018. Now, what she said in her findings was quite interesting, and as a reflection on our industry, is that roles and responsibilities of those procuring, designing, constructing, and maintaining buildings are unclear. Regulations and guidance can be ambiguous and inconsistent. That's where our focus is, really, what happened with the Building Safety Act and whatnot, really. The processes that drive compliance with the building safety requirements are weak and complex, with poor record and change control in many cases. She also hinted on competence across the system is very patchy. Product testing, labeling, and marketing regime is opaque and insufficient. And voices of residents who live in the high-rise building. Now, there she went on to talk about the high-rise buildings. The voices of those residents who live in those buildings are unheard even when safety issues are identified. And what we see now, what has come out as a Building Safety Act, reflects her findings. So what Building Safety Act, which came into force in 22, and some parts of it are still coming out. We're expecting a final part to come out soon. What it does in a nutshell, it creates the building safety regulator, which HSE have taken the role on to look after the building control, or the look after the build application of the building regulations throughout the whole spectrum. National Construction Products Regulator have been established. Protection, obviously, for the leaseholders and involvement of residents in high-rise building management. Responsibilities for building owners, and framework for design, construction, and management for built environment industry. What's important to us really for while we're sitting here is the creation of building safety regulator. Of course, all these things are important, but one that are direct, one that relate directly to what we're saying today is the creation of building safety regulator, obviously the construction product regulator, etc. But the one at the bottom, the framework for design, construction, and management for the built environment industry. And when we use the word built environment industry, she's referring to a construction industry, in a way that there is a new framework, there's a new regime, if you like, how the building work will be designed, constructed, and managed. That's are her findings. And there's a new Fire Safety Act has also come in, which clarifies that in shared block of flats, the designated responsible person has also to consider the building's external walls and the flat entrance doors, etc. That is just to enforce or reinforce the previous requirements to cover the external envelope of the building as well. Now, as a result of a Building Safety Act, as we said, I'm probably repeating myself here, but just to emphasize her message, is the new building safety regulator, higher risk building, a different set of requirements, changes to building regulations, and creating of new roles and duty holders. So what happened as a result of Building Safety Act, and again, we'll go through a little bit detail really, what was the impact of Building Safety Act on different regulations. But fundamentally, it has brought in a big change in the building regulations as we know it, and created new roles and duty holders. Now, there are changes to construction products and creation of national construction product regulator, as we said before, and changes to Defective Premises Act as well. So the Act itself is very far-reaching as well. There are 6 parts to it and 9 schedules, regulator and functions, which is part 2. In addition, part 1 is introduction. Changes to Building Act 1984, which then brings in the changes to the building regulations, design and construction. Part 4 talks about the higher risk buildings in occupation. Part 5 is about provision of safety and standards, and we're waiting for some sections to come out still. Part 6, general provisions for commencement, etc., and there are 9 schedules to it. Now, what are the higher risk buildings? Because the Act creates a different set of regime for those buildings which are categorized as higher risk buildings. The definition that the Building Safety Act is giving us is at least 18 meters high from the ground level, or contains at least 7 stories and contains at least 2 residential units. That's regarded as a higher risk building, and the requirements then become very stringent and different from day-to-day construction projects. Now, the higher risk buildings are colloquially are abbreviated as HRB, would include care homes, hospitals, but excludes hotels, secure residential units, military barracks, etc. If it's purely a commercial building, it won't come under the higher risk building definition. Or if it's a bit, commercial building with only a 1 residential unit somewhere, it wouldn't class as a higher risk building, just to clarify. as defined by the HSE government. The high risk building would be measured from the lowest point from the ground rule, as the diagram, as you can see on the screen, suggests. And the basement is not to be included in counting the stories. When we count the 7 stories, the basement is not counted into that. Now, moving on, what Building Safety Act does. It creating a lot of different regulations. Now, you can imagine when we were dealing with the CDM regulations 2015, or when the first version came out in 1994-95, we were dealing with only one set of regulations, if you like. Now here we have a number of different regulations that have come out as a result of Building Safety Act. Hence, you can imagine the spread of the impact of Building Safety Act. It creates the higher risk buildings, description, provision, supplementary provisions, etc. Building safety registration of higher risk buildings and review of decisions. England, the higher risk buildings, key building information regulations. I won't go through the list. There are tons and tons of regulation that has been created. It modifies the Building Safety Act. Building Act 84. That's important to us, really, because that's what we'll talk about, and that's where the new roles and the duty holders have come into play. Resultantly, as it changes to Building Safety Act, it also changes the Building Regulations 2010. It has created a new regulations called the Building Regulation, etc. Amendment, England Regulations 2023, which gives us the details of the new roles, and also it creates the Building Higher Risk Procedures Regulation 2023. It also modifies the Regulatory Reform Order as well. It brings the changes to it. It creates the Fire Safety England Regulations 2022 as well. Also has an impact on the building approved inspector profession. In fact, the name has changed now. We have to call them building inspectors, etc. And there's a huge impact there, and new registers have been created for the professionals to subscribe to. Now, also creates obviously the HSC have taken on the role of the building safety regulator, and there is a regulation which allows them really to charge for everything they will do as a building safety regulator, as HSE does under the different health and safety regulations. And there are commencement regulation. We so far have got 4 commencement regulation already in place, and we're waiting for a 5th one to come into action or come into force soon. And if we can see it in a snapshot, if you can see the diagram now on your screens, it will show you, if we go on the yellow side or the left-hand side of the diagram, you will see in yellow, that relates to the higher risk building side of things. And you can see the different regulations that have been created that relate to higher risk building. Now, if we stick with what it creates on the left-hand side of things, and if you come down straight, you can see in green now, it has an impact on the the building regulations. Because what it does, it modifies, if you can see in the middle, it modifies the Building Act, which itself then has an impact on the Building Regulations 2010. As a result of the Building Regulation, etc., Amendment Regulation 23, that has an impact on the building regulations as well. And the Building Higher Risk Building Procedure has an impact on the building regulation. And as the changes to building regulations have come in, that has created new duty holders and their competence requirements. Now, again, if we go up at the Building Safety Act on the right-hand side a little bit, it creates, if you follow me again there, it has an impact on the building approved inspectors. And you can see the Building Safety Act Commencement Regulation 1 to 4, building regulators charges. But then underneath it, you will see the building approved inspectors and review of decision regulation 2023, which has a huge impact on the approved inspector disciplines. And someone was telling me, one of our colleagues yesterday, that in fact the approved inspectors are now refusing to give advice that they used to give us, really, to go and ask really if this is okay, how millimeter something we will need here. They are saying no, you should go and find out yourself really now, because of the impact of this Building Safety Act. Hence a huge change in terms of how building regulations are complied with, applied with, and complied with in particularly in England. Obviously, these regulations in the first instance apply to England only, and hence there are parallel provisions are being put in for Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but at the moment the focus is on England. And in orange is all the impact that the Building Safety Act is having on the fire safety side of things. So Section 156 of Building Safety Act modifies the regulatory reform fire safety order, as we know it, RRO 2005. And the Fire Safety Act 2021 that has come in also has impact on the regulatory reform order. And as a result, the new set of regulation called Fire Safety England Regulation 2022 has been created as well. You can see from a snapshot as one view, there's a huge impact on the different regulations and because of the Building Safety Act has come in. Okay. Now, what are the new new roles and duty holders? Sorry, guys, in 2 seconds, I'm just going to change my emails. It's pinging me constant emails. Let me get rid of it. Okay. Guys, can you see this slide which says new roles and duty holders? Now, yeah. Now I'm going to move on into what are those new roles. And I think I'll need now your attention because there's a lot now really that I'll explain and that will impact as we deal with the projects. Now, under Building Safety Act, following new roles have been created, and that has already come in effect from 1st of October 2023. So on every building works project from 1st of October, there are additional duties on clients, or there are client duties, if I can say now. Now, this runs similar exactly as the CDM regulations do. Under CDM regulation, you will see there are similar duties on similar set of people. Surprise, surprise, there are similar names used as well. And under Building Safety Act, there are duties. These are the new roles under Building Safety Act. So clients will have duties under Building Safety Act. Designers, all of the designers have duties under Building Safety Act. Now, also a new role of principal designer has been created to look after the compliance with the Building Safety Act, the Building Regulations 2010. This is exactly similar sort of role that is required under CDM Regulations 2015 as we know it. So hence you could argue that could be two principal designers sitting on a project, one looking at the CDM Regulation 2015, another one looking at the Building Safety Act side of things really. Again, we'll come to that, how that will work in practice. Principal contractors, now they have been put in the mix that they will have duties under Building Safety Act as well. So there's already a principal contractor role under CDM 2015. Now there's a building principal contractor role also under Building Safety Act as well. Now one would imagine, and as we know it, there cannot be, you can't have two principal contractors appointed on a job. So this will be a principal contractor responsible for CDM 2015, but they will also have to look after the duties under Building Safety Act as well. And those duties are not same, they are different. One is looking at the CDM, one is looking at the Building Safety Act. You could argue perhaps that, they all talk about the safety in general. They do, but the focus is different. And I'll explain how the focus of these two roles is different. It's not like an add-on role that you could add on and tick to say, look, okay, we have already have a principal designers list, tick a box and say, by the way, Mrs. Our principal designer, you would also now look after the building regulation side. It's not easy as it sounds. That now let's tick the box and you'll do it. And same with the principal contractor, they will have to up their game quite a lot really in order to fulfill these duties. And obviously the contractors, every contractor now has a duty under Building Safety Act as well. And that's where it gets very far-reaching, very significant change in terms of how the projects are run and the different professionals appointed. Now, let's see. What's the situation we have under CDM 2015? Can you see the slide on slide number 2 of 6? Under CDM regulations, we have the duty holders, client, designers, principal designer, principal contractor, contractors. The client, usually we expect there will be one client. There will be a number of different clients depending on the project. There will be one principal designer under CDM regulations. I'm talking CDM regulations at the moment. Principal contractor, there will be one principal contractor under CDM regulation and number of contractors. They will all have duties. Now, under Building Safety Act, there is a parallel similar sort of arrangement. Client will have duty. Of course, there won't be two clients on a project, so it will be one client, and they will have to look after the CDM duties and also their Building Safety Act duties. Designers, same set of designers will have duties under CDM, but also duties under Building Safety Act. Now, the situation gets very difficult when it comes to principal designer. Under CDM, there could only be one principal designer, which will be under CDM regulation. Fine, that person will stay as to look after the CDM. But then we need another principal designer role appointed to look after the Building Safety Act. So are we talking that there will be one principal designer or two? We'll come to that. Principal contractor, obviously we expect there won't be two different parties appointed to act as a principal contractor on a project. So hence, same principal contractor will end up taking on the CDM duties, but also Building Safety Act duties. And the contractors will have the duties from both angles, both aspects, CDM and the Building Safety Act. Now, if we see it in a different way, again, the same scenario. The client, we're saying they will have duties. In green, CDM, blue, we're talking about the Building Safety Act. Now, in brackets, I'll put the client advisor. Let me come to it in 2 seconds. Designers will have duties from both set of regulations, fine. Principal designer, should that be same or two separate principal designers? That's where it will get very, very difficult. For one principal designer to be able to perform two roles, because under CDM regulation, there's so much really to cover and the focus is different. And if you look at the Building Safety Act, trust me, as I've been involved in the principal designer or the CDM side of things really from 2004 now, almost getting to 20, good part of 20 years, 19 years really, 19 years and a couple of months, in fact. And it took me a long time. It has taken me a whole month really to get my head around to say what exactly the principal designer will do under Building Safety Act. There is so much to cover. Almost you expect them really to be, knowing everything about the building regulations and different approved codes, obviously the relevant approved codes and the building British standards and different codes, etc. There's so much to cover, let alone the same person to have a time and ability to also look at the CDM side of things. It is difficult. It's very difficult, talking from my personal experience and my understanding of the Building Safety Act so far. The principal contractor will have to look after the both set of side of things, as we said before, and the contractors will have to do the same. Now let's come back to the client. Now clients have duties, and what is the practice under CDM 15 is a more often than not, they will end up appointing someone or even the principal designer jumping in to help them to look after their client duties. Now, are we saying the same way, there will be a separate client advisor sitting alongside the client, helping them to look after the Building Safety Act side of things. Perhaps, yes, that could be the answer. Same person, I don't know the answer. There could be two people sitting if one is not really, cannot manage both aspects. Again, it opens up a Pandora's box and a lot of different questions. And how this will pan out is very difficult to know how that will function really, because everything has come so. Yes, in fact, we were aware of these changes coming for last 2 years, but it was, a yo-yo. The rules, etc. The requirements came out, they were taken back, then consultation happened, and then suddenly, it's only been last, 6-7 weeks that everything has come into action and has become applicable from 1st of October. With CDM regulation, at least there was a guidance available, L153, to tell us what exactly and how this works. We haven't got anything to work from. There's nothing out there. I've searched every professional organization, if you like, from RIBA to APS to everywhere, and I can't find any proper guidance to tell me how these rules would be action on day-to-day basis. Yeah, good enough. Yes, we see all the regulations and the requirements, but how that will happen and what needs to be done in practice or in practical terms is not available. And that's very difficult when I'll come to explain the different duty holders and what they have to do. And in fact, as most of you know, that certain duty holders will have to sign, give a written statement. A client has now to give a written statement to say the project complies with the building regulations at the end of the project. Now, how the hell they would do it without knowing the building regulation and different confirmation from different professionals involved? Goodness me, it's unbelievable to some extent what's coming really. But let's go through it. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you or anything really, but I think I'm just opening up different questions, different sort of ambiguities that will come out as a result of what's happening out there. Now, let's talk about the difference between the CDM and Building Safety Act, because the temptation, and we are already seeing this, a lot of clients coming to us and saying, by the way, you've already given us a quote for the CDM regulations. Does that include also helping us with the Building Safety Act? I would say, no, guys, not. No, we can't. I think the expectation is that suddenly any principal designers will also be looking after the Building Safety Act as well. They can't do it. They need to have a good understanding and competency behind him. And now you see the difficulty that has risen. Is the Building Safety Act is the compliance with the Building Regulations 2010, right? The CDM regulations is compliant with the CDM regulations. They're not same set of regulations. They're two different regulations. As we said, one could argue that they broadly talk about safety, but only broadly. The emphasis is different. Now, application of the Building Safety Act is to building work, not the construction work, where CDM relate to construction work. Now, these two definitions are totally different. Building work and construction work are not one and the same. They are two different things, and I'll explain in the next 2 minutes why there's a difference. They are two different things. Now, under Building Safety Act, the people who are undertaking these roles, you would expect them to have a competency with regards to application of building regulations. There are 23 approved documents and relevant and additional British standards, etc., and guidance. Approximately 54 documents that one needs to have a good understanding of. And APS, when I say APS, Association for Project Safety, someone from there went on to count the actual number of different standards and codes that one needs to understand. The figure came out at 649. That someone needs to have an understanding, at least knowing that that code exists, which relates to the application of building regulations. as we all know, one doesn't need to apply or comply with the approved documents if they can show that they can achieve the same compliance through different British standards. So now you can imagine the vastness of the competence required towards the building regulations from that person or from the organization. Now let's talk about the CDM regulation. What would you expect from the person dealing with the CDM regulations? They would have a good understanding, obviously, of the theory and application of the CDM regulations, and along with it, all other regulations which are relevant to construction, health, and safety. Now you can see straight away, the emphasis is totally two different directions. One is building regulation, one is the CDM regulations. Now, the scope of the two set of requirements is also different. Now, building regulations talk about the design and construction in accordance with the design that complies with the building regulations, which is fair enough. But CDM regulations focus is not the limited. This is limited focus on the Building Safety Act that talks about only design and construction in accordance with the design. But CDM regulation talks about the design, construction in a safe manner, i.e. we're talking about the design which is safe, and construction which is safe on site as well, and safe post-completion maintenance, cleaning, etc. And to the extent that we talk about the CDM regulation, that it goes right up to ultimate demolition of the project or asset and whatnot, 40, 50, 100 years down the line. So you can see the breadth of the CDM regulation, whereas the building regulations in scope are limited to building work and relevant to design and construction of it. Now, in just snapshot, you can see what we're talking about, that they are two different things. And if what I was reading really from some professional organizations, not naming the name, is that they were saying the requirements are not so dissimilar to CDM regulations. I would disagree with them, politely, to say no, they are two different emphasis, and they are two different focuses, two different requirements, as you can see and from the slide. Now let's go through the definition. What's the definition of a building work? Under building regulations, it talks about the building. So we're only concerned about the erection and extension of a building, the provision and extension of a controlled service, as we know it, heating, hot water, ventilation, lighting, etc., or fitting of external windows, external doors, roof ventilations, roof lights, etc., are in connection with the building. So focus is on building, the material alterations, etc., and so on and so forth, not going into the depth of it. But what's the definition of a construction work? Construction work is vast. We're not talking about the building here. Remember and see the difference really is that we're not talking about building, but along with this, civil engineering and engineering construction work. The construction, alteration, conversion, etc., everything and maintenance included. Preparation of the intended structure, site clearance, exploration, etc. Assembly of prefabricated elements on site, removal of a structure, i.e. the demolition of it and disassembly. That's not included in the building work, but that's included in construction work. And the installation, commissioning, maintenance, repair. So you can see the difference between two is hugely different. But what happens now is that wherever the building work is involved, the CDM will apply. Where CDM applies, not necessarily the building work regulations will apply, or those rules will be required. So that's where the difference will come in. If it's a building work project, by default, you could take the 99.99% of the time, the CDM will become applicable. Where CDM regulations are applied, not necessarily the building regulations will apply. And hence you have to understand the difference between two. And why I'm going on and on about this thing is that what I see out there, that people are giving this false impression that, you know, every project you have to apply these regulations. Is business as usual, it's just something additional that we have to look for. Is not. There is a huge change really, and a lot of liability on people's shoulders as well. Is that okay, guys? Just to show the difference between two and what we're talking about here. Now we're going to come to the main requirements, the changes that have come into play. Okay, moving on. Now, these regulations, the Building Safety Act, apply to all building work. Now, please note that I'll be using the word building work, not the construction work, because these requirements apply to building work, not the construction work, because we know now the definition between two. Now, all building project, regardless of size and duration, including higher risk buildings. So these, what we will be talking about today, will apply to higher risk buildings as well. Now fall under these new requirements of building regulations and will require the duty holder roles to be fulfilled, i.e. on every building project, you will have client duties, designer duties, principal contractor and contractor duties. And when I say this, probably you're not appreciating the impact of it. That I'm saying that all these duty holder roles apply to each and every project, unlike CDM. Because on CDM regulations, if you have only one contractor, certain duties don't apply. Yes, they don't. If you have only one contractor, you don't need a principal designer. You don't need a principal contractor. But in this case, this doesn't work like this. There are changes. Okay, so all building work projects, regardless of size and duration, which involve more than one contractor, require appointment of principal designer and principal contractor by the client under Building Safety Act, which is similar to CDM regulation. Fair enough? That's fine. Let's move forward. So on any project which involves more than one contractor, the regulations are saying client should appoint a principal designer and principal contractor. Fair enough. They're similar to CDM regulations. Now, where there's only one contractor, all building projects, regardless of size and duration, which involve one contractor, formal appointments of principal designer and principal contractor is not required. So the client doesn't have to appoint a principal designer and principal contractor where there's only one contractor. However, and that's a very interesting however, because that is a change compared to CDM regulations. However, principal designer and principal contractor duties still apply. Even if it's a one contractor, the duties still apply, and I'll explain in detail. Now that's where it gets scary. Now, client on every project, and as we know, client could be a lay person who had got no clue about the building regulations or anything at all, will have to provide a statement when they will apply for a completion certificate to say, to the best of their knowledge, the work complies with all applicable requirements of the building regulations. Now, if I'm getting any work done and you bring that letter to me and say, can you sign it, Khalid? I'll be worried to my stomach, really thinking, goodness me, what I'm signing to say all work that you guys have done. If I'm commissioning work, I have a team of designers and I've got contractors appointed, and you are coming back to me and saying, by the way, now I have to sign a letter to say all the work that you've done complies with the building regulations. How the hell I'm going to do it? What is the basis on which I'm relying on to give that statement? And that gets very scary, very difficult, and there has to be a mechanism. And I'll again come to that in slides further down, that how that will happen in practice. Because obviously a client, a lay person who got no clue, who doesn't understand construction, what they would rely on to sign this statement, they need to have something in front of them. Hence, what will happen And obviously, I'm jumping ahead, but principal designer has a similar requirement and principal contractor has a similar requirement to sign a statement, which is fine. But what about other people? Because the designers have duties as well under these regulations. So what will happen is the client will come to designers and all of designers and to say, by the way, you all designers are, you have to give me statement in writing to say that all the design work you've done is compliant to building regulations. And when they will receive all these statements in front of them from all designers, principal designer and principal contractor, only then they can sign that statement to say, to the best of my knowledge, based on all these statements I have in front of me, I can then sign to say, yeah, to best of my knowledge, the building work complies with the all applicable requirements. And it's only then if it's possible. Otherwise, we'll be leaving the client, hanging in court, really, to be honest, because on what basis they are signing this statement. And that's the difficulty that has come out really as a result of these regulations. Now, principal designer and principal contractors have also has to give the similar sort of statement, but their statement is a little bit different. See the difference in wording. Now, if I go back to the previous statement, it says, to the best of my knowledge, the work means everything complies with all applicable requirements of the building regulations. Whereas the principal designer and principal contractor, their statement says each one of them. So as a principal designer, I will say, I have fulfilled our duties under the building regulations. So I will only say that I have complied with my duties under building regulations. I'm not saying the project complies with the building regulations. I'm saying only I have fulfilled my duties. Whereas you, as a principal contractor, those of us really in today with us who act as a principal contractors or contractors, the principal contractors, you will have to give us, a statement to say you have complied with your duties. You are not saying the whole project complies with the building regulations, but you've done your bit. But the client is in a deep trouble, really, signing up to say the whole project applies with all building applicable requirements of the building regulation. And hence, any good advisor that is sitting with a client will ask them to get everyone to sign a statement to say that they have complied with the duties, etc. And only then they can sign that statement and give it to the local building control authority for the completion certificate. And that's the territory we are already in from 1st of October. So domestic client projects. What happens on domestic client projects? If we're working for an individual, which is not a commercial project, most, not all, you see the wording under CDM regulation, if it's a domestic client, all their duties pass on to the contractor or principal contractor by default, as we know. Here they don't. On domestic client projects, most of them, not all of the client duties under the building regulations will pass on by default to the appointed principal contractor or the contractor, whatever the case may be. If there are more than one contractor, there'll be principal contractor. If it's only one contractor, it would be the contractor who would be required to fulfill most of the client duties. Now, who is the domestic client? The definition is exactly same under the CDM regulations. A client for whom the project is being carried out, which is not in the course or furtherance of a business of that client, i.e. we're talking about projects which are done for individuals' own residential use or by the immediate family members. That's the definition or the explanation of the definition from CDM regulation, and same applies to Building Safety Act requirements as well. Now, with regards to appointment of principal designer and principal contractor, if appointments of principal designer and principal contractors are not made on a non-domestic client project, then the client will have to fulfill the duties of principal designer and principal contractor. Same under CDM regulation. If client doesn't make those appointments, then they will have to fulfill those duties on non-domestic projects. There's a similar requirements under CDM regulations. Now, existing CDM principal design and principal contractors. Now, regulations also say if the client has already appointed a CDM principal designer and CDM principal contractor, then they can certify in writing to say that existing PD, existing principal designer, existing principal contractors will be treated or to be treated as the PD and PC under Building Safety Act, which is fine, but you can't, a client can't certify that without asking the individual who's already been appointed, an individual or organization. Say if we are acting as a principal designer and the client comes to us and say, well, I'm going to certify you to act as a Building Safety Act principal designer. We would say, oh, hang on. Why would you do that? First, we have to prove that we are competent. Secondly, we have to prove that whether we're even willing in the first instance that we want to put ourselves in that role, really. Even to the point that a principal contractor could refuse really to act as a principal contractor under Building Safety Act. In theory, they can. It's not necessary, it's not given that by default, the existing PD and PC will act as a PD and PC under Building Safety Act. No, that's not the case. So when we say there is a provision, there is only a procedural provision that the client can do it if the relevant principal designer and principal contractor agree that they are willing really to take on these roles as well. Okay, there are, as we saw in the first few slides, that Dame Judith Hackett was talking about the competency across the line is patchy. And in fact, I was told yesterday, the local authority are asking for the qualifications of person who has designed the project and their membership numbers, etc., from architects, from structural engineers, and so on and so forth. So the game has already been upped by the local authorities, where they are asking for the competency of relevant people involved in the project. And they are even going to the point of checking their memberships with their relevant professional organizations as well. So already that has started in the background by the building authority, local building authorities. There are stringent competency requirements, and what's been added is that anyone who is making the appointments under Building Safety Act must ensure the appointees have the skills, knowledge, experience. That's all fine. We are familiar to those words under CDM regulations. But what's been added to it is behaviors necessary. What are those behaviors? We're going to come to that in 2 seconds. And organizational capability where relevant. So whoever is appointed, they must show that they are competent. Now, what are those behaviors necessary? And that's very interesting to know. And that could sting quite a lot, really, when it comes down the chain, really. Now, the behaviors that are required is that they need to ensure the compliance with the relevant requirements of the building regulations, including, now please bear with me now, because this is very important to understand, including ability to refuse to carry out any building work which is not in compliance with any relevant requirements. So you could have parties, you could have contractors who could refuse and hold their hand up and say, we're not going to go ahead with the work because it doesn't comply with the building regulations. That could, there is the ability, that is the competence, part of competence in terms of design, that they should have ability to refuse to carry out work if any design work or if the building work to which the design relates to cannot be carried out in compliance with all relevant. It's quite wordy, but the crux of it is that if the design is being carried out, that designer or any other designer involved should have ability to say, I can't carry on with this design because I know that's not compliant with the building regulations. And the behaviors also include cooperating with other people in relation to the work. Fine. Now that's where the third point C gets very difficult, is that refusing to carry out work which is beyond their skill, knowledge, or experience, and asking for the assistance of other person where necessary as well. And there is a further requirement down the line in duties, which will make the life very, very difficult. For if the building work is not compliant, party could stand up and say, no, we're not going to carry on any further because what you're doing is not compliant. Or even also to the point of saying about other work that's been carried out next to them and say, look, no, this is not compliant, and raise those concerns. So those are the behaviors necessary that we are asking about, and the organizational capability, which already was requirement under CDM regulations, but that's been explained a little bit more, that it includes the relevant skills and the processes, etc. Now, how that will apply, and after this application, and it's very important now you stay with me for this application because I'll go through a flow diagram and to see how this will work, and we'll then take a break really afterwards because it has already become too much really, and my throat gives away as well very quickly. So in terms of application, I'll have some definitions, and you bear with me with regards to definitions. A principal designer under the definition would be the principal designer appointed under Building Safety Act. A principal contractor, PC, is a principal contractor under Building Safety Act. MD, abbreviation, is the main designer, the designer who is in control of the design phase of the project. Main contractor is the contractor who is in control of a construction phase of the project. And lead designer, don't get confused, the lead designer in terms of the contract, JCT, etc. No, it's a definition that has been given in the Building Safety Act. Lead designer is that designer among other designers who agrees to fulfill the principal designer duties. And that will make more sense once we'll go through into the flow diagram. Okay, so that's a flow diagram that I'll go through with you, and you'll get a copy of the flow diagram with the presentation as well. And there are a lot of similarities that you'll see with the CDM regulations and the CDM flow diagram that we usually use in the CPDs and the training, etc. But there are changes as well. It's not same. There are changes. So don't use the CDM diagram and thinking that it's same. It's not. The Building Safety Act diagram is different. I'm going to share with you the diagram, and I know probably you won't be able to see the flow diagram that's already appearing on my screen. If not, I'm going to bring it in 2 seconds. So bear with me for 2 seconds. Guys, can you see the flow diagram now? Yeah, good. Let's go through it. And I'll need your full attention here really for a few minutes, and then we'll take a break. Okay. Now, building works project. Let's start from top. See the difference. I'm not talking about construction work. I'm talking about the building work here now. So, and you know the definition we said. Now, first of all, let's go down. Any appointed designer or appointed contractor must make the client aware of their duties under Building Safety Act. That's the first thing to do. We have already, yesterday, I was already writing that, creating that document already. What are those client duties that to be sent out to clients under Building Safety Act? And one of our friends has already showed me a letter that they are planning really to send to their clients as well under Building Safety Act. So things have already started, what needs to be done. Now, going down, how these regulations will apply. First of all, now at this stage, we have to ask ourselves question, is more than one contractor involved? Let's say yes. Sorry, my apologies. We're going to say no, so that we can start really from the right-hand side of the flow diagram. Is more than one contractor involved? Let's say no. There's only one contractor. What happens then? Please stay with me on the right-hand side of the blue line here in the middle, right? Now, when we say no, then what happens is the PD and PC appointments by the client are not required. We said that before. The client doesn't have to make those appointments if it's only one contractor. However, as we said before, PD and PC duties still apply. Now that's different to CDM regulation. In CDM regulation, if it's one contractor, the duties of PD and PC don't apply, and neither appointments are required. Here, appointments are not required, but duties still apply. And how they do it? Now let's stick with the right-hand side of the blue line there with me. Now I am talking about the client duties, the light blue sections I'm talking about. Again, I'm talking about the right-hand side of the middle blue line here. Question I'm asking, is the client a domestic client? Because the situation will be different if it's a domestic client. We are saying yes. So I'm on the extreme right-hand side, or the right-hand side of the red line in the middle. Now, if the client is a domestic client, the client duties, most of the client duties will pass on to the contractor by default. Most of them. We said that before. Fair enough. Let's just stay there. Now we're going down onto that column on the right-hand side of the flow diagram, right-hand side of the red line. What about the designer duties? Any appointed designers will have their own duties. What about the principal designer duties? We said before, the principal designer appointment is not required. But what the regulations say, if there's only one designer, that poor designer will also perform the principal designer duties by default. If it's more than one designer, then the designers have to agree among them who will perform the principal designer duties in writing. So they have to agree between them who will be the brave enough to look after the principal designer duties, and then that agreement has to be in writing and the client needs to be made aware of. So there's no getaway now from the principal designer duties. And the same situation applies with the principal contractor duties. So I'm now talking about the principal contractor duties, and again, stick with me on the right-hand side of the red line. So the principal contractor duties would be fulfilled by appointed sole contractor. If there's only one, obviously sole contractor, if there's only one as a default, and we're talking about those projects where there will be only one contractor. So on each and every project in UK, you will have someone looking after the principal designer duties and someone looking after the principal contractor duties. What about the contractor duties? They apply and they need to be fulfilled by the appointed contractor. The completion statement, now that's where it gets really, really difficult, because I haven't seen anything in the regulation which suggests to me that a domestic client is exempt from giving their statement. I haven't seen that. So that means by default, the domestic client will end up also writing a statement to say, my project, by the way, complies with the building regulations. Now you can imagine the situation for a private domestic client, getting their extension done or something, will have to give a statement to say my work complies with the building regulations. Along with it, whoever is looking after the PD duties will give a statement, and whoever is looking after the PC duties will also give a statement. And everything has become very, very stringent in terms of the application of the building regulations. Now let's go up and stay between the blue and red line. And we're sticking with the one contractor situation, but this time we're answering the question: is the client a domestic client? We're saying no, it's a non-domestic client project. What happens then? The client duties are to be fulfilled by client themselves. Designer duties by appointed designer. PD, principal designer duties, exactly same. If it's one designer, then by that designer has to fulfill those duties by default. Or if there are more than one, then the designers have to agree among them who will look after the PD duties. The PC duties exactly same by the sole contractor. Contractor duties are by the contractor. And in this case, there's no ambiguity that the client, PD, and PC will give a statement. But what I can see already happening out in the practice is that all these people, the designers and to perhaps contractors included, they will end up writing their statement to say, my work, our work that we've done, either design or building work, complies with the relevant requirements of the building regulations, with some proviso. Because even when talking to other design friends, they were saying, well, right, we write that statement, but there's so much requirements under building regulations, so many codes, so many different British standards, how we can write a statement without any caveats, without any conditional and conditions. So, you know, I don't know whether the legal aspects will kick in and the solicitors will get involved to how to give that statement on the basis of what. Otherwise, it's just to give a statement. It's just like a death note, really, to say, look, here you go, now you take and hang me, really, because I'm saying that my work complies with all the relevant requirements of building regulations. But there you go. Let's go up now. Now let's go back to our question, really, where my cursor is, if you can see it, where we ask ourselves question, is more than one contractor involved? And this time we're saying yes. Now the requirements are the client must appoint a principal designer and the client must appoint a principal contractor. Fantastic, that's fair enough. But what happens to domestic client projects? Is the client a domestic client project? Let's say yes. So now we're running a column, running through a column between green line and blue line. You can see the background is different as well to each scenario. Now, in this case, a domestic client case, if PD and PC are not appointed by the client, then the main designer, you know the definition of main designer, the designer in control of the design phase, becomes the principal designer by default, and the main contractor, the contractor in control of the construction phase, becomes the principal contractor by default. Right. What about the client duties? Exactly same scenario as one contractor case. Those duties are to be fulfilled by principal contractor by default, and there's also provision the principal designer could agree in writing that they want to take on those client duties, which is highly unlikely for a PD to do. What about designer duties? They will be fulfilled by appointed designers. What about the PD duties? We already said by appointed PD or the main designer by default. PC duties, same way, by appointed PC or main contractor by default. Contractor duties will be by appointed contractor, and completion statement exactly same way as the one contractor domestic client scenario. I haven't seen anything to exempt that client, so they will end up writing a statement unless something else comes out or any guidance from HSE, etc., to tell us otherwise. At the moment, the situation is that the client will have to give a statement, and we're talking about domestic client, and the PD and PC will have to give that relevant statement, and that's the domestic client more than one contractor. And now the last scenario, let's go back to our question. Is the client a domestic client? Let's say no. So now we're talking the column, which is to the left of the green line in the middle. If PD and PC are not appointed by the client, then the client must fulfill the PD and PC duties. Now, what about the client duties? They are to be fulfilled in a non-domestic situation by client themselves. They obviously can appoint a client advisor to help him out. Designer duties by appointed designers or designer, whatever the case may be. PD duties by appointed PD. And if PD is not appointed by the client, then these duties will fall onto the client themselves. PC duties by appointed principal contractor. If a client doesn't appoint a principal contractor under Building Safety Act, then the client has to appoint. So hence it becomes very important to understand that from client's perspective, they have to be very clued on right from beginning to make those appointments for the building work, PD and PC, for CDM regulations of a PD and PC, and those appointments are to be made in writing. And we have to give right advice to the client to make sure that they do that in writing. If they don't, they'll end up taking the role on to themselves. And contractor duties by appointed contractors, and completion certificate, in this case by the client, the principal designer and principal contractors will have to give such a statement. Guys, that's the way the duties apply. And hopefully with this flow diagram, it now makes more sense to say how the scenario is in terms of the different duty holders' role, etc. And I hope that's easy to understand, and you'll get a copy of this flow diagram anyway with the slides, and hopefully it will make more sense really. Out of the flow diagram, we also done a table which is exactly same as flow diagram, but just in a tabular form. It just explains each duty holder, what they have to do in different scenarios. And with confidence, you can take any project in the UK and it will fall in one of those 4 case scenarios that we talked about. So it just explains those duties, in terms of the duty holders. And the next table explains in each scenario how those duties will apply. And again, you'll get a copy of those these 2 tables as well, along with the flow diagram, so you can have a look really onto that into your own time. Okay. Now, what are those duties? We talked about different duties on clients, etc., principal designer, principal contractor. We're going to jump into the duties now and the nitty-gritty of it. And again, you have to forgive me almost, because I'll go fairly quick, because it was 2 hours, but you saw we already gone lost so much time really just explaining it. There's so much really to cover, and hence I'll rush through the duties relatively quicker, just to cover and complete within those 2 hours, because I have to get to the transitional arrangements as well, because that's important really for us to understand. Now, in terms of duties, guys, can you see the slides now changing, please? Yep. So we're on the slide 104. It's almost a similar situation as we have in CDM regulation. There will be the, no, it's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility, etc., particularly when it comes to the principal designer duties. Now, there will, as we said before, there are duties on client, duties on all designers, duty of principal designer appointed or by default. And again, there could be only one principal designer on the project. So when you say only one principal designer, doesn't mean that includes CDM regulations as well. So there could be one principal designer under Building Safety Act and one principal designer under CDM regulations. And the words are so misleading. Absolutely. I was trying to explain what we do. Someone asked me what you actually do. And I was trying to explain that we do principal design, and they went on to say, oh, are we the main designer on a project? And that became, again, very difficult. And now it will get more difficult, even more so, with the Building Safety Act coming in. Anyway, principal contractor duty, again, there could be one principal contractor, and duties on all contractors involved in the project. But before we go into the duties, I'll explain, give definition to certain words. The word is suitable arrangements. You will see again and again. The arrangements are suitable if they ensure that the design will comply with the building regulations and the building work will comply with the building regulations. So it's the reverse definition. They're saying the arrangements will be suitable, what clients will have to put in if the regulations are complied with. And there will be term relevant requirements, or all relevant requirements. So it's required that work complies with all relevant requirements. What are those all relevant requirements are already explained under Regulation 11 Q1 of the building regulations, and it covers everything. So when you talk about the Schedule 1, Schedule 1 is about the all approved documents. So pretty much it covers everything that is required under building regulations. And yesterday I went through and tried to write a document on all relevant requirements. And believe me or not, it's a huge, huge document really to cover all relevant requirements. Okay. And there's also a term building information that is also introduced in the regulation. Now, building information means any information in client's possession or which is reasonably obtainable by the client, which is relevant to building work. It includes the work, the planning and management, and issues relevant to compliance with any relevant requirements and how they were addressed. Now, one may argue at this point, is that a similar document as a PCI? Perhaps, perhaps not. So that is still the jury is out onto that, the whether that is same document or not really. But again, as I said, the emphasis is different, the scope is different, and perhaps it could be a similar document to a PCI that a principal designer has to produce, or maybe not. We have to see. Okay, what are the client duties? Let's go to the duties, and now I'm on the slide 1 of 5 of the client duties, right? A client must make suitable arrangements. Arrangements we already defined. Arrangements are suitable. The definition went on to say, if they allow the designers and the building, the contractors to comply with the building regulations. So arrangements are huge. So the client has to make suitable arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring of a project to ensure compliance with all relevant requirements. We already said the relevant requirements are huge, and believe me, they are huge. In terms of the building regulations, a client must ensure the arrangements for planning, managing, and monitoring as above are maintained and reviewed throughout the project, goes without saying. A client must provide the building information, similar sort of wording and structure as a CDM regulation, but instead of pre-construction information, now they're talking about the building information as soon as is practicable to the designers and contractors. And perhaps in my mind, there would be a lot of similarities in the PCI and the building information, but then the ultimate focus of those two documents will be different. Client must cooperate with any other person involved in a project to enable that person to fulfill their duties and function. Fair enough. Where there's more than one client on the project, they agree in writing who wants to be a client, which is highly unlikely on a project that you will see there will be more than one client, but there could be situations where there could be more than one client. But then you have to have a written agreement among those who is acting as a client. A client must make suitable arrangement to ensure information is provided to the designer and contractors where there is a high risk work. So if it's a high risk building work, the information needs to be provided to say that it's a high risk work and this is the nature of the work. So it's more a procedural requirement. When a client is domestic client, as we said before, the duties mentioned in item 1 to 10 and 11, including checking competency of appointed persons, will fall on to the principal contractor or the sole contractor, depending on the situation, as we said before. A client must appoint a principal designer and principal contractor when there's more than one contractor, as we went through before. In case where the client has already appointed CDM, PC, and PD, they can certify them as long as the other party agrees to that effect. Where the client fails to make the appointment, then they must fulfill those duties. We already said that before. Client must take reasonable steps to satisfy that any appointments they are making that is competent, they have necessary skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors and organizational capability. And in case of appointing a principal design principal contractor for higher risk buildings, higher risk work buildings, the client must keep a record in writing what steps they took to check the competency of those people. So everything has to be recorded. In relation to higher risk building work, any person making appointments. So if a principal contractor makes an appointment of another contractor on a high risk building project, they must give a record to the client to say, by the way, client, we have made this appointment, and these are the steps we have taken already to ensure the appointee is competent. So the whole record must be given to the client, and the client has to maintain and must keep it safe. Client, so in terms of appointing people, it's become more stringent that you have to give everything in writing to the client to say how those appointments were made, how you check whether those people were competent. Now, the last one is client, when submitting the notice, as we said, they will give a statement to say to the best of their knowledge, the work complies with all applicable requirements of the building regulations. And I already went through with you what those all applicable requirements are, and they are obviously quite extensive in those terms. Now, designer duties. Who is a designer? Designer means any person, including a client as well, or contractor or any other person who carries out a design work or arranges for it or instructs any other person in their control to do the design. Fairly straightforward. Now, designer duties, few are relevant to the competency. A designer must not accept any request to design work if they are not competent, i.e. they do not have the necessary skill, knowledge, experience, and behaviors necessary in organizational capability. The designers also must take reasonable steps to ensure that any other subconsultant or contractors they appoint, that they are competent. It should be, they are fairly similar to CDM requirements in a way. In relation to high risk building work, again, similar requirement that applies to a client. If a designer is making appointment of any other person, they must give the whole record to the client to say what step they took in order to ensure that the appointee was competent. Where anytime designer ceased to satisfy the competency requirements, they must immediately let the person who appointed them to know that they are no more competent and they cannot carry on. That's a new requirement that we haven't seen in CDM regulations, is that they have to constantly keep a tab on their competency to say if they get to a point where they think that they are not competent, or the work gets to a point where they realize it's just too much, they must tell the person who appointed him. There are general requirements on the designers on a domestic client project involving more than one client. A designer who is in control of the design phase, which we call the main designer, will become principal designer by default. If it's only one contractor involved, then sole designer will become principal designer. If it's more than one designer, then they will agree in writing between them. We went through it already in the flow diagram. I think we went through the last one as well already. If there's more than one designer on a one contractor project, they should agree in writing who will act as a principal designer, and they will be called lead designer. And they give a copy of that agreement to the client. A designer must also take reasonable steps to ensure the design work carried out by them is planned, managed, and monitored. In CDM regulation, the requirements for planning, managing, and monitor was only restricted to principal designer for planning, managing, and monitoring the design phase or pre-construction phase, and on to principal contractor for planning, managing, and monitoring the construction phase. Now, the requirements on the Building Safety Act for planning, managing, and monitoring has been extended to everyone. The client has a requirement for planning, managing, and monitoring. The designers have requirement to have steps in place for planning, managing, and monitoring. Same applies to contractors as well. So everyone, all duty holders, client, principal designer, designers, principal contractor, and contractors all have duties to plan, manage, and monitor. A designer must cooperate with other people on the design, the top bullet point, which it goes without saying. Now, what are additional duties? In fact, the main duties of designer. A designer must not start design work unless satisfied that the client is aware of their duties. So they have to make the clients aware. Designers, the last bullet point, the designers must take all reasonable steps to ensure, sorry, there's a repeat of that ensure, sorry for time. The design is such that if the building work is carried out accordingly, would be in compliance with all relevant requirements. Sorry, it's a little bit too wordy. I think we can sum it up in a way to say a designer must ensure that their design complies with building regulations in simple terms. and that's their main requirements. And to effect, if we really go through it, there is already a contractual requirement on those designers anyway to ensure that their design complies with it. But under these regulations, criminal liability has also been placed onto the designers to ensure that their design complies with the building regulations as well. A designer must take all reasonable steps to provide sufficient information about the design, construction, and maintenance of the building to assist the client, other designers, and contractors. So the ambiguity of the information needs to disappear. The design has to be very specific and clearly open and clear what designer expects really to be designed, and not to leave things really which then could become a problem, or items which are just left for some people, other people down the line really to design to their own specification, then which they can come back and buy. So I think designers should have a clear idea of what they expect. Where a designer is carrying out only part of the design work or not, that's where it gets difficult. Where a designer is carrying out only part of the design work of the building, which comprises the project, the designer must consider the other design work which directly relates to the building work, so the design of other designers, and now I guess a very difficult part, and report any concerns as to the compliance with all relevant requirements. So it's not only that they are required to ensure that their own design complies with the building regulations, but if they see any holes in the design of others, where they see that their other people's design is not compliant with the building regulation, they must raise a concern. Now that's where it gets really funny. Imagine if I'm doing the civil engineering part of the design, and then if the design comes to me, the water structural engineer, architect, other people have designed, and I think, it doesn't seem to be right, and then I have to go and raise the concern. Imagine the commotion that will cause really in the design team and how people will do it. That will become very, very difficult. And that must be informed to the principal designer. Now, if requested to do so, a designer must provide advice to the principal designer and client to the effect that whatever they're doing, whether that is a high risk building work or not. That's just a procedural requirement for high risk building work, nothing more. Right, so in terms of designer duties, fairly obvious, but there's some sting in the tail, if you like, really, among the requirements. Now, moving on to the principal designer duties. Principal designer definition is a principal designer is a designer in control of the design phase of the project, as we said before. There are general requirements for competence. A principal designer must take all reasonable steps to satisfy that they are competent. Any person they appoint, sub-consultant contractors, are competent as well. In relation to high risk work, exactly similar as before. If they make any other appointment of a sub-consultant or contractor, they must give a record to the client, and the client must keep it safe. Principal designer must be competent themselves, goes without saying. Principal designer, if they are not individual, they must designate a person, an individual in their organization with right skill, knowledge, experience, and behaviors who has the task of managing his function as principal designer. And a principal designer must not act or accept the appointment if they are not able to fulfill the competency requirements. It goes without saying almost. Where at any time a principal designer ceases to be competent, they must let the client know. Now, what are the additional duties? And that's where the main duties come in. Principal designer must plan, manage, and monitor the design work and coordinate the matters relating to the design work so that all reasonable steps are taken by the team that the design is compliant with all relevant requirements. That's the main duty on a principal designer, is to ensure the whole team is working as a one to ensure the building regulations are being complied with. How they would do it is an open question. I don't know the answer at the moment. I will know probably in few weeks' time, and more I work on it. But at the moment, it's just going through the motions to find out how a principal designer will ensure that happens. And then also it opens up a question: the what is the function of approved inspector or the approved inspector sitting next to us and the principal designer? What's the difference between two? What a building inspector is supposed to do, what a principal designer is supposed to do. Now, try to find a difference really. But obviously the scope is different, and there's already we're hearing the approved inspector, as I said before, they are pushing back. They're saying, no, it's not our job to provide you information. Go and ask the principal designer to tell you. And that's where the function of a principal designer will come in, is to guide, assist the whole team to say how the building regulations will work, or any queries, etc. And you imagine the knowledge that principal designer will need to be able to answer those queries. Yep, you can imagine really how that will work. A principal designer must take all reasonable steps to ensure the designers cooperate with the client, the principal designer, and principal contractor. Fair enough. A principal designer must take all reasonable steps to ensure the design work of all other designers is coordinated to ensure the design is compliant with all relevant requirements, which is fair enough. Principal designer must take all reasonable steps to ensure the designers comply with their duty. Now, how do you do that? That was even difficult enough really under CDM regulation, now more so difficult under the Building Safety Act, for a principal designer to confirm that the designers are complying with their duty. Of course, there would be actions really that one could come up with really, but it's quite intense process really, and it could put a lot of people in straight with the designers really, and awkwardness really there. A principal designer must liaise with the principal contractor and share with the principal contractor any information relevant to planning, managing, and monitoring. And sorry, there's a typo, B is repeating. The coordination of the building work and the design work for purposes of ensuring compliance with all relevant requirements. Sorry, guys, it's quite dry, very harsh, and quite a repeat of the same words as well. So you bear with me a few minutes. We'll go through it. Where a principal contractor provides comments to principal designer. Now, that's where another requirement is that if a principal contractor comes to principal designer and say, by the way, I have some comments about the compliance with the building regulations, then the principal designer must give regard to those comments as well. They can't ignore him. They have to do something about him. A principal designer, if requested, assists the client in providing the building information to other designers and contractors. A principal designer must, when the appointment ends, if halfway through a principal designer appointment ends, that's where again it gets very difficult here, you bear with me. So if a principal designer's appointment finishes halfway through or 3/4 of the way, they can't just walk away from the project. Within 28 days, when the appointment ends, they have to give a document to the client to say, Mr. Client, by the way, here's the document which says how we comply with our duties so far as required under Building Safety Act, and they have to give that document in writing. Fair enough. What happens next when the new principal designer comes in? Because obviously the client has to appoint a new one, because if they don't appoint the new one, then the client becomes the principal designer. So when the new principal designer comes in, they have to go through all the information the previous principal designer left to ensure that everything they'd done was up to scratch. If they didn't, they have to do it themselves. So point number 9, where replacement principal designer is appointed, they must review the arrangement of a principal designer put in place for fulfilling those duties, so that reasonable steps are taken at that point to ensure the design is compliant with all relevant requirements. So if someone didn't do their job properly, a principal designer, they could sting or leave a mess for a next principal designer to come into the process and retrospectively try to go back through the whole thing and to ensure that all relevant requirements are complied with. And you can imagine the mess that will create really if someone does a tick box exercise and say, to say, yeah, fair enough, then someone else really down the line could be in a big, big mess. And probably someone, in my position, if I know someone acted as a principal designer for Building Safety Act, who I know perhaps and being a little bit harsh that they didn't do their job properly, then in our position, then we have to start from scratch and go back retrospectively, do the whole thing again. Whether I want to do it or not, that's an open question again. A principal designer must, if requested, assist the client in providing information, building information to designer and contractors. Fair enough. Principal designer must, when appointed, I think we went through it already. So last one, when a notice is submitted by the client to the local authority, the work is completed, the principal designer must give a statement. And that statement says that they have fulfilled their duties as principal designer. So if I'm standing here, I want a document in front of me, which my team gives to me, or I write really to say how I complied with all the duties. Once I know how I've complied, then I'll write a statement. So I have to ensure that I complied with all the duties before I sign on my piece of paper to say, I have fulfilled my duties. Because that could be presented in the court really to say, principal designers say they complied with their duties. Now ask him how they did that. Principal contractor duties, similar to principal designer in a way, but focused on a construction phase. Principal contractor is a contractor who is in control of construction phase. A principal contractor must ensure that they are competent. I'll rush through this really because these are the competency requirements. A principal contractor must be competent. Whoever they appoint must be competent. If it's a high risk building, they must inform the client how they check the competency. I'm just going to rush through this. There are again similar competency requirements that we went through for a principal designer. Now, a principal contractor must plan and monitor the construction phase, coordinate in a matter relating to building work to ensure. Now, the requirement is the principal contractor also has a duty now, not only the designers, it's the principal contractor's duty to ensure the work is compliant to the building regulations. The principal contractor must take all reasonable steps to ensure the contractors and any other persons involved in relation to the building work are cooperating with other people. The principal contractor must ensure the building work of all contractors is coordinated to ensure compliance with the building regulations. Now, principal contractor must take all reasonable steps to ensure contractors involved in the building work are complying with their duties. Under the regulation, principal contractor must liaise with the principal designer for any information relating to the planning, managing, and monitoring, etc. And now, when it comes to the principal contractor must liaise, is they have to almost inform and share the information with the principal designer. And so almost you can say that a principal contractor will write a construction phase plan, but this one focused more on the Building Safety Act to say what arrangements they will put in place really to ensure the compliance with the Building Safety Act. And where the principal designer provides comments to principal contractor in relation to building regulation, they must give it regard. Principal contractor must, if requested, assist the client in providing information. There's a lot of similarity now with the principal designer duties. Now, similar to principal designer, if principal contractor leaves, they have to give within 28 days, leave a record to say how they complied with their duties under building regulations. And any other principal contractor will have to check everything the previous one left to ensure that everything is compliant to the building regulations. So there's no getaway from compliance. Even the parties coming late in the party will still have to ensure the building regulations are complied with. And the last one, where a notice is submitted, same like principal designer, a principal contractor has to give in writing to say that they fulfill their duties under the building regulations. Contractor duties, again, I'll rush through very quickly. A contractor must not accept the appointment if they're not competent. They must ensure any further appointments they make are competent in relation to high risk building work. Any further appointments they must make the client aware. Where at any time contractor cease to be competent, they must let the person who appointed them On a domestic client project, if there's only one contractor, they must help with the client duties, also fulfill the principal contractor duties as well. And a contractor must take reasonable steps to ensure the building work they carry out is and by person under their control is planned, managed, and monitored. They must cooperate with other people. Contractor must not, I'm talking on now on additional duties. Contractor must not start building work unless satisfied the client is aware of their duties. The contractor must ensure the building work they do is compliant with the building regulations. Now, that's their duty as well. Contractor must provide each work under their control appropriate supervision, instruction, and information. In relation to the building work, a contractor must take all reasonable steps. The sufficient information is provided. And when a contract is only part now, that's where there's a string in the tail here. Second bullet point, where a contractor is carrying out only part of the building work, which comprises a bigger project, the contractor must consider any other work which is not done by them, but which relates to them, done by others, and report any concerns they have in relevant to the compliance with the building regulations. So if a contractor is working and they notice the other contractors are working, but they're not complying with the building regulation, their work is not complying with the building regulations, they have a legal duty to report it. So the contractors, in a way, are grossing up onto other contractors as well. My goodness me. And if requested to do so, contractor must provide advice whether their work comes under high-risk building work. Okay. What is the expected knowledge of a principal designer? Again, rushing a little bit quick. Can the existing principal designer can act as a principal designer under Building Safety Act, and their knowledge would be good enough? Of course not. I think we say that is not, their knowledge won't be good enough, because the BSA principal designer focuses on the building regulations. Knowledge requirements are different and huge. However, HSE thinks that existing principal designers should be able to do the job. But how? They are still saying as long as they fulfill the competency requirements, and that's where it comes in, and probably HSE are probably living in a dream world to think that all the principal designers, they work and they could stay act and comply with the competency requirements really. What are those relevant requirements? We already know that how a CDM principal designer will know all these things. No way they will know these requirements really. And when we talk about these requirements, it talks about the Schedule 1, and look at the Schedule 1. All the approved documents are there and they have to be complied with. And the APS have gone on to show what it entails, what a principal designer needs to know. And there are about 54 different documents they've gone up with, and 649 codes and standards that a principal designer should have understanding of. They won't know everything and every bit of it, of course not, but at least they should know where to find the information. Oh, by the way, which code, which standard, etc., or whatnot really. So we're expecting them quite a lot really, in fact. Okay, so competency, there are documents already out there which explain what is expected from a principal designer, principal contractor. For instance, for a principal designer, there's PAS 8671, which explains what a principal designer competency criteria is. Similar one, 8672 for an individual principal contractor, and there's a core criteria covered under 8670. If you want to see it, they are freely available out there. And also there is a talk that the accreditation bodies like CHAS, etc., SMS, and all SSIP, they will be changing their requirements on all designers and also on contractors to fulfill the requirements of the Building Safety Act as well. Not only CDM and health and safety, but the requirements under Building Safety Act, which will put a spanner to works with a lot of people really, because these requirements are changing. What are the transitional arrangements? Now, new roles and duty holders, they do not apply if the building work is started before 1st of October. What that means by started, I'll come to the definition. Building work in relation to which, or if the building work has not started, but the plans have already been submitted with the local authority before 1st of October, unless the plans have already been rejected or have been rejected after 1st of October, or a building notice have been given to local authority before 1st of October, and the work itself will start by 6th of April 2024, then these regulations or the duties don't apply. So if the work has already started, significant has already started, I'll come to that definition quite quickly in 2 seconds. Or if the work has not started, but the plans have already been submitted with the local authority, or notice has already been given to local authority, and it's expected the work will start before 6th of April 2024. If the work don't start by 6th of April, that means these regulations become applicable again, and the duties are to be complied with, and hence the people are to be appointed for these roles. So one has to go through the projects and see where we are with this. And what it means is started. Where it relates to complex, it's a big definition already there, and you will get a copy of it when you see the recording, of course, of it. For a complex building, if the foundations have been put in the place or the structure for the lowest floor is already there, and if the work is not complex, the construction project which is not complex, the work is regarded as commenced when the subsurface structure of the building or the extension, including all foundations, any basement level, and the structures of the ground floor are complete. That's where I would say the work has started. Or for any other building work, the work is to be regarded as commenced where a statement sets out the details of the work which the client considers amount to 15% of the proposed work is already complete. Then we can say the work has started. There's also definitions given on the local authority building control, LABC. You can see there are definitions given, and you can see it on their website and also on the recording as well. I'm going to skip through that and come to a little quiz. So we're all done here, guys. There's a lot to cover, and I'll quickly come to 5 different questions really for you to just quickly test, see whether we got the message across or not really. And again, there's we're not trying to test someone's intelligence, memories, or whatnot really, not at all really, just trying to see how effective we were really, to be honest. So question 1, for each and every construction work where CDM principal designer and CDM principal contractor are appointed, it is now required to appoint a principal designer and principal contractor under Building Safety Act as well. Is that true or false? Quickly shout away, right or wrong, whatever it is, guys. Can you help me here? What do you think?
False.
Is it
false? False.
Anyone for true? No, it is false. Because the rules apply to building work, not construction work. Bear in mind the definition between two, or the difference between two.
She's going to create me a shit.
A principal designer appointed in writing for CDM 2015 is by default required to act as a principal designer under Building Safety Act, as there cannot be 2 separate principal designers on a project. True or false? Guys?
Oh,
False.
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 It's false, because a PD appointed by CDM does not by default act as a PD, and there can be 2 principal designers, one for CDM and one for Building Safety Act. Third, are principal design and principal contractor duties applicable for buildings work which are for a domestic client and involve only one contractor? So it's a domestic client project. There's only one contractor, small piece of work. Do the duties of principal designer and principal contractor apply?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we say they apply to every project now. So there's no getaway from those duties. For on a domestic client project, which involves more than one contractor, the duties of a principal designer under Building Safety Act by default will fall on to which designer? Sole designer, designer in control of the design phase as agreed among designer or CDM principal designer. Which one, guys? A, B, C, D. Quickly, if someone can shout away.
D.
That would be B, designer in control of the design phase, the main designer. The last one. Principal designer and principal contractor statements on completion of the project must be signed on all projects, including domestic client projects and the project involving only one contractor. Yes, true or false?
True.
True.
To be signed by on all projects. Guys, that's it. I hope it was useful. And sorry if I have to rush a little bit on a few occasions because of the time constraints, etc. I tried my best really to convey as much as I could, and I hope I did it, to some effect. I hope you found it useful and helpful, guys. For any questions, obviously we run out of time really, but any questions you have, no matter how you feel that they are naive, etc., they're not naive. They're important to me and to us. Please drop me a line, email to say, if you have any query, question, etc., I'll try to respond. And please, can I also request if you have any feedback, good or bad, even if you thought that wasn't, the session wasn't great or anything, please let us know so that hopefully when we do the next one, or if we do with other clients, other colleagues, or even open, because we're making this available to everyone, open to public, so that everyone can benefit from it. We're not restricting that not only for our clients, but we're making the recording available and will be available on YouTube as well. So any feedback would be helpful to us, so that we can change it, we can amend it, we can make it even more better and more effective. And by the way, just last second bit, I'm not trying to market ourselves, so I'm not good at it, but we are offering these roles under Building Safety Act as well. And if you need any help with that, please feel free to give us a shout really. But no, thank you so much for joining me, and hope it was useful.
Thank you.
And thank you. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend as well, guys. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Khalid.
Khalid.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you, Khalid.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Khalid.
Thank you, Khalid. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.